Robert Hale was a man who lived in a world filled with noise. Every day, his phone rang with urgent calls, his office buzzed with the voices of assistants and clients, and meetings were filled with endless talking. He was a millionaire, a man who could buy almost anything he wanted. But when he came home, the sound faded. The big house stood quiet, and in that silence lived his only daughter, Emily. She was 12 years old, with soft brown hair and eyes that seemed older than her years. She had never spoken a word in her life. Doctors had examined her since she was a baby. They looked at her throat, her ears, her brain scans. They tested her hearing, her ability to understand. Everything came back normal. She could hear perfectly. She understood everything around her, but her voice never came. One specialist in London told Robert, "It's psychological, not physical. She can speak, but something is stopping her." Another in Paris said, "She may never speak. You must learn to accept it." But Robert couldn't accept it. He blamed himself in ways he never admitted to anyone. Emily's mother had died shortly after giving birth, and Robert had thrown himself into work. He told himself it was to give Emily a good life, but deep down he knew he had left her in the care of nannies most of the time. He wondered if his absence had made her retreat into her own silent world. Every time he saw her sitting alone in her room, drawing in her notebook, he felt a sharp ache in his chest. He tried everything money could buy. He flew in speech therapists from different countries. He paid for experimental treatments and private sessions with child psychologists. Some sessions showed hope. Emily would try to form sounds, her lips would move, but no voice came out. And each time it failed, Robert felt more helpless. He would come home at night, see her at the dinner table, and wish for just one word from her. Despite her silence, Emily wasn't unhappy in the way most people thought. She loved to draw. Her notebooks were filled with sketches of birds, streets, people, and sometimes a mysterious cafe she had never visited. She liked sitting in the garden and watching the world without being noticed. When Robert would sit with her, she would smile softly, but their communication was always limited to gestures, nods, and the occasional scribble on a piece of paper. Robert wanted to connect with her, but he didn't know how. In business, he could read a person's mood in a second. He could close million-dollar deals with the right words. But with his daughter, he often felt like a stranger. She was his blood, yet there was a wall between them, built not of anger, but of silence. And the worst part was that he didn't know how to tear it down. At night, when Emily was asleep, Robert would walk past her room and see the small nightlight glowing. She always slept curled up, her notebook beside her. He would stand there for a few minutes, wanting to whisper something, but knowing she wouldn't answer. Sometimes he would imagine a day when she would call him Dad for the first time. He imagined how her voice might sound, soft, maybe a little shy. But morning would come and the house would remain the same. One winter evening, Robert sat by the fireplace with a glass of whiskey, staring at the flames. He thought about the future. Emily would grow up, maybe go to college, maybe live far away. Would they still be strangers? Would she ever know how much he loved her? Money could not solve this problem. He could build skyscrapers, but he couldn't build a bridge to his daughter's heart. Still, he never stopped trying. Every weekend, he tried to spend time with her, even if it was just sitting in the park or driving through the countryside. He learned to read her expressions, how her eyes brightened when she liked something, how she tilted her head when she was curious. She rarely laughed, but when she did, it was silent, her shoulders shaking, her eyes sparkling. That silent laugh was more valuable to Robert than any business victory. Over the years, the silence became their way of life. Robert stopped hoping for sudden miracles, but the longing stayed. Sometimes when they were out together, he would notice how people looked at her, some with pity, some with confusion. He hated those looks. Emily was not broken, she was simply different. But deep inside, he still wished for that one moment when she would speak, just once, to tell him something only she could say. The night before the cafe visit, Robert sat in his study, looking over Emily's drawings. There was one picture that caught his attention. It was of two people sitting at a table in a small cafe. One was a little girl who looked like Emily. The other was a woman with dark skin and a bright smile. Above their hands, there were strange shapes, almost like a code. He didn't understand it, but he felt something stir in him. He closed the notebook, unaware that the drawing was not just imagination, it was a small glimpse into the day that would soon change both their lives forever. The morning was cold, but the sunlight was soft and golden, spilling through the tall windows of Robert's mansion. He stood in the hallway, buttoning his dark coat, watching Emily from a distance. She was sitting at the dining table, a cup of warm milk in front of her, sketching something quickly on a fresh page of her notebook. Her hair fell over her face as she leaned forward, completely lost in her drawing. Robert hesitated before speaking, though he knew she wouldn't answer. "Let's go out today," he said gently, his voice breaking the quiet. Emily paused, looked up at him, and tilted her head as if to ask where. He simply smiled and motioned toward the door. She closed her notebook, picked up her scarf, and stood without a word. Moments later, they were walking toward the car. Robert rarely had a free Saturday. Most weekends were filled with business calls, charity meetings, or traveling for work. But lately, he had been trying to clear his schedule more often, even if it meant refusing deals. Being with Emily felt more important than adding another zero to his bank account. He wanted to give her small memories, ordinary ones, that she could keep forever. The drive into the city was quiet except for the low hum of the engine. Emily kept her eyes on the passing streets, sometimes pointing at a shop or building. Robert would follow her gaze, guessing what she was thinking. They passed a park where children were running and laughing, and he noticed how Emily's eyes softened. He had no fixed plan for the day, but he remembered seeing a small cafe near the old library a few weeks ago. It looked warm and inviting, with fairy lights hanging in the window. He decided to take her there. She liked cozy places where she could watch people without being noticed, and maybe this could be one of those spots she would love to draw. They parked a short walk away, the cold air brushing their cheeks. Emily walked beside him, her small gloved hand tucked into his. As they approached the cafe, Robert saw that it wasn't crowded. A bell above the door rang softly when they entered. Warm air and the smell of fresh coffee wrapped around them immediately. The inside felt like a hidden corner of the city. Wooden tables, shelves filled with books, and paintings of local streets lined the walls. Soft jazz music played from an old speaker in the corner. Robert noticed how Emily's eyes darted around, taking in every detail. She had a habit of memorizing scenes quickly, as if saving them for later. A waitress greeted them with a polite smile and showed them to a table by the window. Robert helped Emily take off her coat, then hung it on the back of her chair. She quickly pulled out her notebook and pencil before the waitress even returned. Robert opened the menu, scanning the options. "Hot chocolate for you?" he asked, glancing at Emily. She nodded without looking up from her drawing. He smiled faintly. Hot chocolate was her favorite, and it never changed. For himself, he ordered a cappuccino and a slice of lemon cake. While waiting, Robert's mind wandered. He thought about the therapy session they had attended just a week ago. The therapist had tried a new set of flashcards, encouraging Emily to mimic sounds. She had tried once, pressing her lips together, but no sound came out. After a few minutes, she lowered her gaze, refusing to continue. Robert had smiled at her and told her it was fine, but inside, he had felt the same heavy disappointment he always did. His thoughts were interrupted when the drinks arrived. The hot chocolate had a swirl of cream and a sprinkle of cocoa powder on top. Emily's eyes lit up slightly, and she reached for the cup with both hands, blowing gently before taking a sip. Robert watched her, feeling a strange sense of peace in that moment. They sat quietly for a while, Robert sipping his coffee, Emily's pencil scratching lightly on the page. He glanced at what she was drawing. It was the inside of the cafe, almost exact in detail, from the coffee machine in the corner to the bookshelf near the door. In the middle of the drawing, there was a figure behind the counter, someone she hadn't even seen yet. Robert wondered how she imagined it so vividly. A light movement caught his attention. A different waitress, one he hadn't noticed before, was coming toward their table. She was carrying a tray, her steps quick but graceful. She had warm brown skin, braided hair pulled back neatly, and a smile that seemed natural, not forced. She placed a small plate of cookies on the table, even though Robert hadn't ordered them. "For her," the waitress said softly, nodding toward Emily. Then she glanced at the drawing. "You're really talented," she added warmly. Emily froze for a moment, looking up at her. Something about the waitress's eyes seemed to catch Emily's full attention. Robert thanked her politely, assuming she would leave, but she didn't. Instead, she crouched slightly to be at Emily's eye level, her hands resting gently on the table. And then, without a word, she began moving her hands in smooth, deliberate motions. Robert blinked, confused. At first, he thought she was adjusting her fingers absent-mindedly, but then he realized she was speaking with her hands, not random gestures, real sign language. Emily's pencil rolled off the table. Her eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as if she might speak, but she didn't. Instead, her small hands began moving, slowly at first, then faster, her fingers shaping responses best Robert couldn't understand. The cafe around them seemed to fade. The jazz music, the soft hum of other conversations, all of it became background to this silent, flowing exchange between a young girl and a stranger. Robert sat completely still, his heart racing. He had never seen his daughter communicate like this before, not with such speed and expression. He didn't know what was being said, but he could see it in Emily's eyes. She wasn't just answering questions, she was telling stories. For the first time in public, she looked alive in a way he had never seen. And in that moment, Robert realized that something extraordinary had just begun, though he didn't yet know how much it would change their lives. The waitress's name tag read, Jasmine, though Robert only noticed it after she had been standing there for a moment. She had a calm and warm presence, the kind of person who made you feel at ease without saying a word. Her eyes kept shifting between Robert and Emily, but it was clear she was more focused on the little girl. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, her hands moving again in that graceful, almost dancing way. Robert didn't understand the signs, but they looked deliberate, like a language with its own rhythm. Emily, who usually avoided eye contact with strangers, stared at Jasmine as if she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. Emily's fingers twitched at first, hesitating, as if she was unsure whether to respond. Then, slowly, her small hands began to move. The signs she made were clumsy at first, but then her movements became smoother, faster, more confident. Robert's mouth went dry. He had never seen her do this before, not with her tutors, not with anyone. Jasmine smiled widely, clearly understanding everything Emily was saying. She signed back without hesitation, her expressions changing with each movement. Surprised, amused, curious. It was like watching two people talk in a completely different world, one that Robert had never been invited into. He felt both amazed and a little left out. The cafe around them kept going as normal, customers sipping coffee, the barista steaming milk. But to Robert, the air felt heavier, charged with something important. He leaned back in his chair, afraid to interrupt whatever was happening between the two. Jasmine gently placed a cookie in front of Emily, signing something that made the girl's eyes sparkle. Emily picked up the cookie, but instead of eating it right away, she signed something back quickly, her fingers moving with excitement. Robert noticed how alive her face looked, her eyes brighter, her cheeks slightly flushed. He had seen her smile before, but never like this. He tried to guess what they were talking about. Maybe Jasmine had asked her what she liked to draw. Maybe Emily was telling her about the picture in her notebook, or maybe it was something entirely different, something personal Emily had never shared with anyone else. Finally, Jasmine turned to Robert, speaking out loud for the first time since she approached. "Your daughter is very smart," she said warmly. "She knows sign language." Robert blinked in surprise. She does?" Jasmine nodded. "Yes, she's very good at it." "Who taught her?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No one had, not that he knew of. Emily had never used sign language with him or with any of her tutors. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know she knew how." Jasmine's expression softened, as if she understood the weight of what he had just said. She turned back to Emily and signed something slowly, almost like she was asking a gentle question. Emily hesitated for a moment, then signed back. Jasmine's smile turned a little sad. "She says she learned it herself," Jasmine explained, "from books and from watching videos online. She didn't use it with you because she thought you wouldn't understand." Robert felt a sharp ache in his chest. His daughter had been carrying an entire language inside her, and he had never known. She had been speaking all along, just not in the way he expected. and she had kept it hidden because she didn't think he could hear her in that language. Jasmine seemed to sense his thoughts. "She's amazing," she said softly. "A lot of people can't learn this on their own, but she has." Emily looked between them, sensing the shift in her father's mood. She reached out, touching his hand lightly. Then she made a small, simple sign, just one movement of her fingers. Robert didn't understand it, but the way she looked at him told him it was important. Jasmine smiled and translated, her voice gentle. She said, "She's happy right now." The words hit him harder than he expected. Happy. It had been so long since he felt certain about her feelings. He tried to say something, but his throat felt tight. Instead, he just nodded and squeezed her hand. Jasmine didn't rush away like most waitresses would after serving a table. She stayed for a few more minutes, patiently signing with Emily, her face lighting up every time the girl answered. Robert could see how naturally they understood each other, like two people who had been waiting to meet. Eventually, another customer called for Jasmine's attention. She smiled at Emily, signing something that made the girl grin and promised she'd be back soon. As she walked away, Robert followed her with his eyes, thinking about how strange life was, that out of all the cafes in the city, they had come here today. When he looked back at Emily, she was already sketching again, her pencil moving quickly across the paper. He leaned over slightly to see. She was drawing Jasmine, capturing the way her hands moved in mid-sign, the warmth in her smile. It was almost perfect, even though Emily had only just met her. Robert sat quietly, watching his daughter draw. The silence between them felt different now, not empty, but full. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe there was a door into Emily's world, and Jasmine had just shown him where to find it. Robert sat frozen in his chair, his hands resting on the edge of the table, his coffee slowly cooling in front of him. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. His daughter, who had never spoken a word in her life and who often avoided strangers, was now moving her hands quickly, her face filled with expression. Emily wasn't just answering Jasmine's signs, she was pouring out thoughts, feelings, and stories with a fluency that stunned him. Emily's eyes shone with an excitement Robert had never witnessed before. Her cheeks had a light pink glow, and her mouth curved into small, quick smiles as she signed. Every movement of her fingers was sharp and confident, her wrists turning, her hands shaping symbols Robert didn't understand but could feel the meaning of through the way she moved. It was as if her hands had been waiting years to finally speak, and now they refused to be still. Jasmine responded with the same speed, her hands dancing in the air like a second language that lived inside her. She laughed silently at something Emily signed, her shoulders shaking, and then signed something back that made Emily nod rapidly and sign even faster. Robert could see that they were lost in a deep conversation, one he could not hear, but could clearly feel. His heart pounded. All these years, he had thought Emily was trapped in a silent world, cut off from everyone else. But now, sitting here in a small cafe, he realized she had been carrying her own voice all along, just in a form he had never learned to understand. And the sight of it filled him with both joy and guilt. Joy because he was seeing his daughter truly alive for the first time. Guilt because it took a stranger to open the door he had never even known was there. Emily suddenly turned her head toward him, her fingers still moving as if to include him in the conversation. She made a few quick signs toward Jasmine, who then smiled warmly at Robert and spoke aloud. "She says she wishes you could understand her like this." The words hit him hard. Robert's throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't look at Emily. He forced himself to smile, but his chest felt heavy. All these years, she had wanted to talk, and she had been able to, just not in the way he expected. He nodded slowly, as if promising himself something. Emily, seeing his reaction, reached for his hand. Her small, warm fingers closed around his, squeezing once before letting go. Then she turned back to Jasmine and continued signing, her movements even faster now. Robert could see the eagerness in her face, the relief of finally being understood without needing a pen, paper, or awkward pointing. The world outside the cafe window kept moving. Cars passed, people walked by, but Robert barely noticed. Inside, time seemed to slow. Every second felt important, like something was happening that would change their lives forever. He didn't dare interrupt. He didn't want to break whatever magic had connected his daughter to this kind-hearted waitress. Jasmine leaned in closer to Emily, their heads almost touching, her hands moving gently but with purpose. Emily laughed. No sound came out, but her whole body expressed it. Robert realized he was smiling without meaning to. It had been years since he'd seen her laugh like that. Finally, Jasmine glanced back at him. "She's telling me about her drawings," she explained. "She says she likes to draw the places she wants to visit, and she drew me before she met me." Robert blinked in surprise. "She drew you?" "Yes," Jasmine said, nodding. "She says she imagined meeting someone who could talk to her in signs, and in her drawing, that person was me." Robert felt something shift inside him. This meeting didn't feel like chance anymore. It felt like something Emily had wished into existence. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook, flipping to the page she had drawn earlier. She turned it toward Jasmine. There, on the paper, was a sketch of a woman with braided hair, warm eyes, and hands mid-sign. Jasmine's smile widened. "That's me," she said softly. Robert stared at the picture, then at Jasmine, then at his daughter. He didn't know how to explain it, but he knew this moment would stay with him for the rest of his life. Emily put the notebook down and began signing something quickly. Jasmine's eyes softened as she translated. She says she feels safe talking to me. She's never felt that before. Safe. That word echoed in Robert's head. His daughter, who had spent her life surrounded by expensive therapists and polite strangers, had finally found someone who made her feel safe. And it had happened here in the most ordinary of places, over cookies and hot chocolate. Robert's eyes burned, but he didn't let the tears fall. Instead, he cleared his throat and said quietly, Can you teach me some of it?" Jasmine's smile widened, and she nodded without hesitation. She turned to Emily, signed something, and then looked back at Robert. "She wants you to learn. She says if you learn, you can talk every day." For the first time in years, Robert felt a door open between him and his daughter, and he had no intention of letting it close again. Jasmine stayed by their table a little longer, her hands still moving gracefully as she spoke in signs to Emily. The girl's eyes followed every motion, her own fingers responding quickly, full of life and confidence. Robert watched in silence, trying to remember each gesture, though they passed too quickly for him to understand. After a few minutes, Jasmine looked at Robert and spoke aloud so he could follow. "She's telling me about how she spends her days." Jasmine said with a gentle smile. "She says she draws for hours, sometimes watching people from the window. And she feels lonely because nobody talks to her in a way she understands." Robert felt the words hit him like a heavy weight. His daughter wasn't just silent. She had been trapped in a space where no one spoke her language. Even he, her own father, had been on the outside. It was like realizing she had been standing behind a locked door all these years, waving for him to come in, and he never had the key. Jasmine must have noticed his expression because she signed something slowly to Emily, then looked back at him. "She says she never told you because she didn't want to make you feel bad. She knows you tried to help her in other ways." Robert's chest tightened. He had spent so much money on doctors, speech experts, and therapies, yet he had never learned the one thing that would have truly connected them. He thought of all the evenings he had sat across from her at the dinner table, trying to guess what she was thinking. All the times she had smiled politely but not shared what was in her heart. And now, in a matter of minutes, a stranger had opened that hidden door. Jasmine continued to sign and speak, her voice calm and warm. "She says when she saw me, she thought maybe today would be different. She didn't expect me to know sign language. And when I started signing, she felt like she wasn't invisible anymore." The words tore through Robert. Invisible. His daughter had been living in a world where people saw her but didn't truly see her. And here she was, talking to someone who didn't just notice her, someone who understood her completely. Jasmine reached for a small notepad from her apron and wrote down a few symbols, basic signs. She turned the paper toward Robert. "This one means hello. This is thank you. And this is I love you." Robert tried to copy them with his hands, his movements clumsy. Emily giggled silently, covering her mouth with her hands, but her eyes sparkled. Jasmine smiled. "She says you did it wrong," she teased, "but she's happy you're trying." Robert tried again, slower this time, watching Emily carefully. He made the sign for I love you, and although it felt strange at first, he saw Emily's eyes widen. She looked at him for a long moment, then signed the same thing back. It was the first time she had ever said those words to him, not with her voice, but with her hands. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to keep learning. Jasmine showed him a few more simple signs: eat, drink, happy, sad. Emily joined in, correcting his mistakes with gentle taps on his hand. The three of them laughed softly together, the moment feeling almost unreal. Robert realized that this was the first real conversation he had ever had with his daughter. Not just guessing her thoughts or reading her expressions, he was actually talking to her, even if it was only a handful of words. And she was responding, openly, without hesitation. After a while, Jasmine explained that she had grown up with a deaf younger brother. She had learned sign language because it was the only way to truly connect with him. It's not just about communication, she said. It's about showing someone they matter enough for you to learn their world. Those words stayed in Robert's mind. He glanced at Emily, who was now drawing something quickly in her notebook. When she turned it around, he saw a picture of himself and her sitting at the cafe table, both of them using their hands to talk. Jasmine looked at the drawing and smiled. She says this is what she wants, more days like this. Robert couldn't help but nod. She'll have them, he promised quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Jasmine had to attend to other customers, but before she left, she wrote down her phone number on the same notepad and slid it toward Robert. If you want, she said, I can teach both of you properly. It's not hard, and it could change everything. Robert took the paper and folded it carefully, as if it were something valuable. He looked at Emily, who was watching him closely, almost afraid he might say, no. We'll do it, he told her firmly. We'll start as soon as we can. Emily's eyes softened, and she reached out her small hand, resting it over his. She didn't need to sign anything. The look in her eyes told him everything: gratitude, relief, and a quiet happiness that he hadn't seen in years. Robert knew that day in the cafe had shown him something priceless. His daughter didn't need fixing. She needed understanding. And he was ready to step in her world, even if it meant learning everything from the beginning. Robert sat in his chair long after Jasmine walked away, his hands still resting on the table, his mind turning over everything that had just happened. Emily was busy finishing her hot chocolate, but every so often she glanced up at him with a look he couldn't quite describe, hope mixed with something softer, like trust. He felt a lump in his throat. For years, he had been chasing the wrong solution. He had thought her silence was the problem that needed to be solved. He had paid doctors to run tests, therapists to use flashcards, and specialists to promise breakthroughs. All along, the answer wasn't in forcing her to speak. It was in finding the language she already had. He looked at his hands, remembering the signs Jasmine had shown him. They had felt awkward, but when Emily smiled after he got them right, it was like a door had opened between them. A small one, but enough for light to come through. He wanted that light to grow. Jasmine came back once more to drop off the bill. She signed something quickly to Emily, making the girl laugh silently, and then she turned to Robert. Don't wait too long to start, she said gently. The sooner you both learn, the sooner you'll understand each other completely. He nodded, pocketing the paper with her number, as if it were the most important business card he had ever received. On the drive home, Emily held her notebook in her lap, drawing again. Robert didn't speak. He didn't want to break whatever calmness had settled over her. The city streets rolled past, but his mind was far away, picturing a future where conversations with his daughter were effortless, where she could tell him her thoughts without him guessing. When they reached home, Emily headed straight to her room, as she usually did. But a few minutes later, she returned to the living room, carrying her sketch pad. Without saying anything, she sat beside him on the couch and started drawing the sign for I love you on the paper, illustrating it in a way that made it look like art. When she was done, she slid the page toward him and pointed. He made the sign again with his hands, slower this time, making sure to get it right. Emily's face lit up. She signed it back, and they sat there, repeating it a few more times, smiling at each other without words. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the moment in the cafe when Emily's hands had flown through the air with such confidence. He thought about the years she had spent in silence, carrying a voice no one heard. He thought about the word Jasmine had translated, safe, and how much it meant that Emily had felt it, even for a moment. The next morning, Robert woke up early. He made breakfast himself instead of letting the housekeeper do it. When Emily came into the kitchen, he greeted her not with words but with the new sign for good morning he had looked up on his phone. Her eyes widened, and she signed it back before sitting down. They ate in quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This was warm, shared, and full of possibility. After breakfast, Robert showed her a short video on his phone, basic sign language lessons. He pointed to himself, then to her, asking without words if they should watch together. She nodded instantly. For the next half hour, they sat side by side on the couch, following along with the video. Robert stumbled over the shapes, his big hands clumsy compared to Emily's quick, delicate movements. She corrected him patiently, tapping his fingers into place when he got them wrong. Every correction was gentle, every mistake an excuse for them to laugh together. Later that day, Robert called Jasmine. She sounded happy to hear from him, and they arranged the first lesson for the weekend. When he told Emily, she signed something quickly that he didn't understand at first. She grabbed her notebook, wrote it down, and showed him. Can't wait. The week passed slowly, but every evening Robert tried to learn a few more signs. Emily began using them with him at dinner, testing what he remembered. Sometimes he got them right, other times she shook her head, laughing silently. But each small success felt like a step forward, and each shared laugh felt like a piece of the wall between them falling away. On Saturday, they returned to the cafe for their first proper lesson with Jasmine. This time, Robert noticed how Emily walked in, her shoulders straighter, her steps lighter, her eyes scanning the room until she saw Jasmine. She waved in greeting, something she had never done with strangers before. They sat at the same table by the window. Jasmine taught them the alphabet first, then common phrases. Robert struggled to keep up, but Emily was quick, her hands remembering movements she had taught herself years ago. Every time Robert got something right, Emily's smile grew wider. Every time he stumbled, Jasmine reminded him that it wasn't about speed, it was about effort. At one point, Jasmine signed a short sentence to Emily, who turned to Robert and repeated it for him slowly. He managed to copy it, and Jasmine laughed. She just told you, you're doing better than yesterday. Robert looked at Emily, feeling a swell of pride. By the end of the lesson, Robert could greet his daughter, ask how she was, and tell her he loved her without speaking a single word. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Emily to feel understood in a way she never had before. That night, as he tucked her into bed, Robert signed "I love you" once more. Emily signed it back, then reached out to hug him tightly. It was a long, wordless hug, but it said more than any conversation could. As he left her room, Robert realized that in all his years of chasing success, this was the first time he truly felt he had achieved something important. Not in his career, not in wealth, but in becoming the father Emily needed. Over the next few weeks, the house began to feel different. It was still quiet, but it was no longer the kind of silence that felt heavy or lonely. Instead, it was filled with the soft rhythm of moving hands, gentle laughter, and the warmth of shared moments. Robert had rearranged his schedule, canceling meetings and pushing back business trips so he could spend more time at home. He told his assistant that unless it was an emergency, his evenings were no longer for work. They were for Emily. Every night, they practiced sign language together. At first, Robert learned slowly, fumbling over shapes and forgetting what he had learned the day before. Emily would patiently correct him, her small hands guiding his fingers into the right positions. He could see the pride in her eyes every time he got it right. She began to share more, what she liked, what she didn't, what made her laugh. Things she had never been able to tell him before were now pouring out, and he listened to every word, even if it was made with hands instead of a voice. One evening after dinner, Emily signed that she wanted to show him something. She ran to her room and came back with a large notebook. When she opened it, Robert realized it was filled with drawings from years past. She flipped through the pages, pausing at certain ones to sign explanations. There was a drawing of a park she liked to visit when she was younger, one of the ocean from a family trip, and even one of Robert sitting at his desk, looking tired. He asked her, through signs, why she had drawn that one. She smiled softly and signed, "Because I wanted to be near you, even if you were busy." The words made his chest ache. He thought about all the times she had quietly sat in the corner of his office as he worked, never interrupting, just drawing. He had always thought she was simply entertaining herself. Now he knew she had been choosing to be close to him in the only way she could. Robert began using sign language not just at home, but when they were out. At restaurants, he ordered for her using signs so she confirmed what she wanted. At the park, they would talk about people passing by, describing their clothes, or guessing where they were going. Emily's world seemed to grow larger with every conversation they had. When Jasmine visited for their lessons, Robert noticed how Emily lit up, not just because she was learning, but because she had two people now who spoke her language. Jasmine often encouraged Robert to practice small conversations with Emily without her help, and he could see his daughter becoming more confident with every session. One Saturday after a lesson, Robert surprised Emily by taking her to an art store. He told her to pick anything she wanted: sketchbooks, pencils, paints. She wandered the aisles slowly, touching the brushes, testing the softness of the papers. When she was done, her basket was full, and Robert didn't hesitate to buy it all. That evening, she made a new drawing of the cafe where they had first met Jasmine. Above the table in the drawing, she sketched two pairs of hands mid-sign. A few days later, Robert had an idea. He cleared a space in the living room and set up a small table with art supplies just for Emily. He also brought home a set of flashcards for sign language. On one side was the sign, on the other, the meaning. He suggested they make it a game. He would hold up the card, and they both had to make the sign as quickly as possible. Emily loved it. Sometimes she beat him, sometimes he managed to get it first. Every time, they laughed together. Their bond grew stronger in ways Robert hadn't imagined. He noticed Emily leaning against him on the couch more often, or slipping her hand into his when they walked outside. She began showing him her drawings without him having to ask. Once, she signed, "You're my favorite person," and Robert had to look away for a moment so she wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. The biggest change came one evening when Robert returned home from a short meeting. He walked into the living room to find Emily teaching sign language to the housekeeper, patiently correcting her just as she had done with him. The sight filled him with a quiet pride. His daughter wasn't just learning, she was sharing. One night, while they were practicing, Robert signed a question. "Why did you never show me before?" Emily hesitated, then signed back, "I didn't think you wanted to learn. You were always busy." The words stung, but he understood. He had been so focused on fixing the problem his way that he hadn't seen the simple truth. What she needed most was his time. He signed back, slowly but firmly, "I will never be too busy again." Emily smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, and signed, "Promise?" He nodded. From that night on, it became their routine to spend the last half hour before bed talking in signs about their day. Sometimes the conversations were about small things, what she had drawn, what they would eat tomorrow. Sometimes they were about bigger things, her memories, her feelings, her dreams. Robert found himself looking forward to those quiet moments more than anything else in his day. One evening, as she was getting ready for bed, Emily signed, "You can hear me now." The words, silent but powerful, stayed in Robert's mind long after she had gone to sleep. He realized she was right. He had always thought hearing was about sound, but with her, it was about understanding, and now for the first time, he could. Months later, the cafe had become one of their favorite places. It wasn't just a spot for coffee and hot chocolate anymore. It was the place where their lives had changed. That Saturday morning, Robert and Emily walked in together, the little bell over the door giving its familiar ring. The warmth of the room wrapped around them, carrying the smell of fresh pastries and coffee. Emily's hand was in his, but not because she was shy or nervous. She simply liked holding it now. She walked with a quiet confidence, scanning the tables until she spotted Jasmine. The waitress was wiping down a counter, and when she noticed them, her face lit up. She signed a greeting from across the room, and Emily immediately signed back. They sat at their usual table by the window. Robert took off his coat and watched as Emily pulled out her notebook, not to draw, but to write down some new signs she wanted to remember. She had grown so much in these few months, and not just in skill. There was an openness in her now, a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Jasmine came over with their drinks, hot chocolate for Emily, cappuccino for Robert, and a plate of warm cookies she had saved for them. She signed to Emily quickly, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Robert didn't just watch anymore, he joined in, his hands moving in practiced motions. His signs weren't as fast as theirs, but he had learned enough to keep up. Emily grinned as she signed a long sentence, her hands flying in the air. Robert caught most of it, then looked to Jasmine for the parts he missed. Jasmine smiled and said, "She's telling you she had a dream last night that you both were on a big stage giving a speech in sign language to thousands of people." Robert laughed and signed back, "Maybe one day." Emily nodded enthusiastically, her eyes shining. They spent nearly an hour at the cafe, signing about everything from what they'd do later in the day to Emily's latest drawings. Other customers glanced their way from time to time, some smiling at the sight of their moving hands, others curious but silent. Robert didn't care who watched. He was proud. Proud of his daughter, proud of how far they had come, and proud of himself for finally stepping into her world. At one point, Jasmine leaned toward Robert. "You've gotten really good," she said warmly. "I can see she's happier now." Robert looked at Emily, who was busy dunking a cookie into her drink, and nodded. "She's teaching me more than I'm teaching her," he replied. Jasmine smiled knowingly. Before they left, Emily signed something to Jasmine, who laughed and translated for Robert. "She says she wants to pay for your coffee today because you always pay for hers." Robert chuckled and shook his head, signing back to Emily, "Next time." Emily tried to argue playfully, but in the end, she let him win. On the walk home, the winter air was crisp, and the streets were lined with lights for the upcoming holidays. Emily kept close to him, signing small comments about the decorations they passed. She pointed out a shop window with a display of snow globes and signed that she wanted to draw them later. Robert agreed, promising they'd stop by sometime so she could choose one for herself. When they reached home, Emily went straight to her art table and began sketching. Robert watched from the doorway for a moment before joining her. He sat beside her and started practicing the signs they had used at the cafe, repeating them until she noticed and joined in. They practiced until dinner, laughing when one of them got it wrong. That night, after dinner, they curled up on the couch with a small book on advanced sign language that Jasmine had given them. They practiced new words: proud, future, always. Robert made a mistake on always, and Emily laughed so hard she had to put the book down. When she caught her breath, she signed slowly so he could get it right. This time, he did, and she nodded with approval. When it was time for bed, Robert followed her to her room. As she got under the covers, he signed, "I'm proud of you." Emily's face softened, and she signed back, "I'm proud of you too." Then she hesitated, her hands still. Slowly, she formed another sign, one he hadn't seen her use before. He looked at her questioningly, and she grinned before mouthing the word without sound. Always. Robert felt his throat tighten. He reached out and hugged her, holding her for a long moment. When he pulled back, he signed, "Always," right back at her. She smiled, closed her eyes, and curled into her pillow. As he walked back to his room, Robert thought about how much had changed since that first day at the cafe. His daughter still didn't speak with her voice, but now he heard her louder than ever. Every sign, every gesture, every smile was a conversation they could finally share. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but they would face them together. The silence between them had been replaced by a language of understanding, and in that language, he had found something richer than words, a connection that would last. In Emily's own sign, always.